All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Elections Weekly. I'm sorry we were off last week. We had some scheduling problems and just had find a difficult time getting it on. But this week we're here, albeit a day late. But we're excited to be back. This week we've got Joanna, along with Joe and Adam, all of them contributors for Elections Daily. So we got some really good discussions probably going to come in here. But I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Joe for the first discussion, which we're going to discuss some of the Pennsylvania results. We had primaries on Tuesday, which we covered live on Elections Daily for the first time. Thanks to amazing efforts of Harrison and the team, we were able to keep track of some of the results and make calls on elections live as they happened, which will continue next week. One of the major states was Pennsylvania, which held most of its primaries were held, and most of the races have been determined by this point.
Correct.
Yep.
If we're gonna start off here, I guess we'll start off with the GOP here. They had two really big primaries, both in Northeast Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's 7th and 8th district both had huge GOP primaries in seats that the GOP will definitely be trying to target come Election Day in 2020. So Pennsylvania's 7th district, which is currently held by Susan Wild, is one that's kind of gone under the radar a little bit, mainly because of how popular Wild is in her district. She's from the Lehigh Valley area, and she won by a pretty good 10-point margin in 2018. But remember, this is a district with its lines in 2016. Hillary Clinton only won by 1 point. So it's still a race, and it's still a seat that if, partisan chats are what's coming on here, is going to be a huge issue. And also, it cannot be overstated that the GOP candidate last time had some major issues, especially with Me Too issues. Marty Nothenstein had some real issues with Me Too as they came out in the final month of the campaign, which really hurt him. And not only did he lose the special in the old seat, but also, as I said, lost by 10 points in the old seat. And this is also Pat Toomey's old congressional seat as well, based in the Lehigh Valley, based in Allentown. So it's very much an old red seat that Susan Wild was able to flip blue thanks to the blue wave in the House and also Marty Nothenstein's issues. So we had two pretty serious candidates here in this race, both from the Lehigh Valley area. Both were Lehigh County board members in previous years. He was 2018 candidate Dean Browning, who lost to Marty Nothenstein by only about a couple hundred votes in 2018 primary, and Lisa Scheller. So Scheller has a really interesting backstory because Scheller used to be addicted to heroin. She was a reformed heroin user, and that's become a huge part of her backstory. Using that experience, she built up a business, a coffee house that employs reformed drug addicts. So that way they have a better life and they have a way of income as they continue to deal with their issues and continue to get better and get healthier from their previous hard drug use. This isn't your typical drug user. This is your reformed cocaine, heroin, meth, users like those who really have issues with that. Scheller was really well known in the area for that, while Browning obviously still had a lot of momentum from 2018. He came back from a second time. And what this primary really became about was who was more Trump. Browning continuously criticized Scheller for not being pro-Trump enough, saying that she wasn't loyal enough to the president when he was running in 2016, that she wasn't loyal enough to the tickets that were running in 2018. But that didn't matter in the end when Lisa Scheller, about a week before the primary, got the president's endorsement. And I would honestly say that's probably what put her over the edge in this seat. Scheller won about 52% of the vote compared to Browning's 48%, and that included huge wins in the two most populous counties, Lehigh and Monroe counties, Northampton counties, both went for Scheller by small but necessary amounts that allowed her to win by those 4 points, and really was a key point in her driving through. And it was a really big result and a really big night for that group. And definitely a victory for President Trump and his continued endorsement streak, how much credibility you want to give to that. And also for Elise Stefaniak's EPAC. It's a GOP-based PAC that is trying to get more women in swing or leading GOP seats to run. Miss Stefaniak has been a huge component behind that, and she was giving a lot of money and a lot of time to Miss Scheller. So where they've struggled in seats before, it was definitely a big sigh of relief and a big victory for those in the party who really want to start off there.
Mm-hmm. So what would you rate this race at this point? Because Scheller seems like she has a really compelling backstory that might be an asset in the campaign. Although, as we know, last time the election wasn't particularly close compared to, I think, what I was a little bit further out than people were expecting, and the seat as a whole leans Democratic. So, would you say the race leans Democratic, or is it more of a tilt or a toss-up race?
For me, I think it's a lean Democratic seat still. Like I mentioned early on in my little spiel there, Wild is definitely popular within this district, and she definitely has a lot of credibility. She still is doing a lot in the process, and she does just a good job. She's out of the 4 major women who came from Eastern Pennsylvania who were elected in that blue wave and flipped seats. She has definitely been the most moderate, and she continues to be with that image and continues to go on and play well. For me, it's still lean Democrat. I think this is definitely a seat that will be tighter than what it was in 2018. Many say, some of those seats are probably going to be maybe wider margins for Democrats. I don't think this is going to be one of them. I definitely think that Lisa Scheller is going to shrink that margin, potentially down between like a 3 to 5 point victory. But I still think Susan Wild is definitely favored. She has the money advantage. She has the incumbency advantage. And I think even the district in itself is a little bit more blue than Pennsylvania itself. I think this is still going to be a Wild victory when we end on November 3rd.
And how much was it won by? It was a Clinton +2 district, or a
Clinton +1, according to results, +1 district.
And I believe Peter had some thoughts about the district as well.
Yes, I do. I live in the seat, ironically, so I can say this at a very personal level. I think Scheller's a good candidate. I think she was better than Browning as a whole as a quality. I think Wild is going to be tough to beat. This seat likes re-electing its incumbents. The last incumbent to lose was in 1992. Since then, all our incumbents tend to win the re-elections rather comfortably. So Scheller's going to have to go against the norm of this seat, and she's going to have to try to play a middle ground. This seat really likes moderates. It doesn't like party line voters. They want someone who's not afraid to tell their own party to back off. So I think in terms of it, I would say right now it's a lean Dem in that area, but I think Scheller's the best they could have gotten out of their candidate selection pool here. I think overall, points-wise, I think she'll do better than Onstein. I think Marty was not the greatest person to run in a competitive seat like this, but I think she'll reduce it to about a 5 or 4 point probably Wild win. I just think it's going to be hard for Scheller to get the bump in Lehigh County, which is trending very Democratic, and the city of Allentown itself, which is really the big vote getter that will probably help Wild get over the line, since that's really where Democrats have to get their strength in. And she's done a very good job with her Latino outreach in the district that is getting more Hispanic by every passing cycle.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to Pennsylvania's 8th district, because that's okay.
And that's the neighboring district.
Yes, that's the neighboring district. That's a little bit more north. That's where you see Lackawanna County, Luzerne County. Those are the big counties in this district, and this was one that we were really watching in the elections daily chat, and when we were commenting. This was definitely a seat that, as the night on, we really continue to watch. So, like I said, this county's huge populace base is based in Lackawanna and Luzerne counties, where these were, usually heavily Democratic counties, especially Lackawanna. But President Trump, he kind of switched the narrative on that. He still lost these counties, but he made them closer than any Republican candidate had since Ronald Reagan. So you can see the 8th district up here. Eric has, I believe, posted it very nicely here for us. See Lackawanna, Luzerne, Monroe, Wayne, and Pike.
That's only part of Luzerne. That's the other portion of Luzerne is in the 9th district.
Yes, that's true. And I'm very sorry I misspoke. Lackawanna was the county that Trump lost. Luzerne Trump won by a considerable amount. I'm very sorry about that slip up. But we had a lot of serious candidates in this race. Jim Bonnier is a former Trump administration official who worked on the economic sides of things, who's from this side of the state. And, it was a huge part of his base that he was part of the Trump campaign and that he was part of the Trump administration and that if he was elected to Congress, then he was going to continue all the goals that they had there and what they were trying to do there. The other considered major candidates were a Democrat turned Republican, former Hazleton mayor, Mike Marsicano, and then Earl Granville, who was endorsed by House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy in the coming days. But that top three wasn't how it ended up. In a pretty shocking turn of events, Teddy Daniels, who made some noise on election Twitter about a night or two before the election because he put out this statement very strongly coming out against not only the what happened with George Floyd, but also coming very strongly for all the protests that were happening, which is not usually the messaging that we have seen from the GOP in the coming years when it comes to these protests, especially stemming from Black Lives Matter. So it was a very different type of setup that we saw, but no one really thought Dan would do well. He only had about $30,000 in cash on hand. He hadn't fundraised particularly well. But on election night, Daniels was going back and forth with Bonnier when it came to the lead. And if you're talking about election day voting, Daniels had that pretty much under his command. He had won the election night vote. But as mail-in ballots came on, especially from Lackawanna and Luzerne counties, especially Luzerne, Jim Bonnier was able to pull it out. He has won by about 4 points. And that was a huge kind of, interesting, really probably the most interesting GOP primary that we saw tonight. And, Daniels, he had a message and he had a much more, libertarian and, not as usual justice message that we had seen from Republicans, especially in what was a very Trumpy and if it was with the Republican base, a normally very conservative, strongly Republican base that was being drowned out by that. So we'll go in with there. I know other people want to speak. So Eric, I know you want to make some comments.
I'll let Joe say what he wanted to say first, and then I'll mention a little bit because I was the one who kind of broke the Teddy Daniels email that kind of surprised some people. So.
Yeah. So, but like I said,
sorry, Adam wanted to say something.
Oh, Adam, go ahead, Adam. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was off. Sorry. So one of the things worth considering in this district is that you essentially have three major groups when looking ahead to the general here, which is you have your traditional white working class, which has been the Democratic base of this district for decades and are trending right considerably. And sorry, you have your rural parts of the district that's, Wayne and Pike counties, which are outside of Lackawanna and Luzerne. And then you also have Monroe County, which has a significant and growing population of super commuters who are people who live there and commute to New York City primarily. You have a little bit of that in the, I believe it's Pike, but it's almost all in Monroe currently. And that's a significant group because it's diverse and it's liberal and it's growing pretty rapidly as more and more people get priced out of the New York City real estate markets.
And it is a super commute. It is a very long distance to travel from Pennsylvania to.
Oh yeah, I've driven on I-80.
Absolutely.
But I'll let Peter say. Yeah, I'll let Peter say something after what I'm going to say. But so I kept getting these random emails from these "Make America Great Again" candidates who they send their stuff. It's like we're going against the liberals. We're gonna support President Trump. We're gonna build the wall. And this guy's pretty typical of that. He had some libertarian sort of leanings. I believe he owned like a marijuana farm or something along that line. He's a biker, an ex-cop, and so kind of this macho candidate. And so you would think he'd be the first one to be out there going these riots are bad and the people who are rioting are bad. We don't support riots or protests. But no, he was in the email. He was like, yeah, I'm a police officer, or I'm an ex-police officer, and I was trained in the use of force, and they did everything wrong. They were either incompetent or they were willfully malicious, and they should be fired and they should be prosecuted. and I support all the protesters who are, protesting peacefully. And so I was kind of taken aback by the email. Obviously, towards the later end of the email, it went to, rioting is bad, and President Trump has had a great response. And, you'd expect that in a district that's 91% white and it flipped from a 12-point Obama district to an 11-point Trump district. You would expect that sort of rhetoric. But it was just interesting that I had seen, and this was multiple MAGA candidates who were specifically taking a hardline anti-riot stance, but a very hardline pro-protester stance. That sort of distinction was kind of made for the first time for some people on the right. So I thought it was interesting. I didn't think he would get anywhere near the top 3. I think I mentioned in the tweet, it was like, he's not going to win. He's not going to come close to winning, but he did better than you would expect. I don't know if that had anything to do with it. It probably didn't, but I just thought it was interesting. He would have been the next election Twitter meme if he had won. He had some interesting ads, and maybe kind of the opposite. Last time they had a candidate who was well funded and just could not beat Matt Cartwright, the incumbent. So maybe a different approach works. We'll see.
On the race itself, I think Bognet, who is going to be facing Cartwright, I think it'll be an interesting race itself. I think Bognet, if I'm saying his name wrong, and apologies if I am saying it wrong, is a much better candidate than what Churin was, as Churin had issues with his residency in the district, since he was not necessarily not lived there for a time being and had been a Lehigh University professor for most of that. So I think this race will be interesting. I think it will come down to the county margins, as Adam alluded to. I think Cartwright is very good because of his former presence as a former attorney, having a spotlight on local news, building up a big personal vote over the years. I think it's going to be a tough fight. I think this district is obviously trending right very quickly. I just think Cartwright might get one more little pass, as it will, with his election success before maybe it's more dire and serious in terms of him possibly losing this seat. I think it would probably be right now about a 3 or 5 point victory for him.
Yeah, I'd agree with Pete on basically all points. Cartwright is still an unusually typically strong candidate for this area. Definitely, again, I've mentioned this numerous times in tweets and in articles. Pennsylvanians are notoriously geographical within their voting, maybe more so than any other state in the nation, in which we like our people. And if you're from our area, we're going to probably more likely vote for you than, any of that. And I see we've got a comment on YouTube. Joe Biden, a lot of it is made about Joe Biden being from Lackawanna. He's an old Scranton boy. And if you personally want my opinion on that, I don't know how much maybe that significantly will matter. When Biden comes down to it, what people know him as now is not only just as Obama's vice president, but also as a senator from Delaware. He's never held any type of elected office in Pennsylvania. His residency has not been in Pennsylvania for decades now. It's been a very long time since he was the Pennsylvania boy. So I think that's been overstated a little bit. And I honestly would expect Matt Cartwright to probably outrun Biden in this district, probably by about a good 5 to 6 points, honestly, if you want my opinion. I still think Trump wins this district. I don't know if he wins by as much as he did in 2016. But I definitely think that someone like Matt Cartwright probably still outruns Biden by a good amount in this district, and that's just because of what he is. Any other Democrat in this seat would be very much in danger of losing it. And Cartwright, the Democrats need to keep him as long as they can in that seat, because once he's gone, this is going to be very much a seat that the Republicans are going to really want to pounce on and take.
Mm-hmm.
I agree fully with Joe, and I think with Scranton, Joe, I think it's a nice catchphrase, but I really don't think the average person in northeastern Pennsylvania really feels attachment to him. I think it's going to come down more to what they do the ballot box. He may have his headquarters in Philly, which is nice for the state, but I still don't think it makes a difference either way. I think Cartwright will outrun Joe more on his personal stuff, being from Lackawanna and having that connection with the population.
Mm-hmm. And just in response to the geographical voting thing, Pennsylvania, in a way, kind of reminds me of what North Carolina used to be, even as recently as 2008, where the western part of basically Democrats were strong in the east and in the far east and the far west, and the Republicans were kind of strong in the middle in some of the urban areas. That's kind of changed now, but Pennsylvania's kind of held on to that, especially in primaries.
Mhm.
If you look at the Auditor General race, I know we're going to mention that in a little bit, but the primary for that was extremely geographical. In terms of you were from a region, you did really well in that region, above anything else is what it seems like. But I'm trying to find a decent map to show for that because it's not on Decision Desk, I don't think.
That's another issue. We'll go to that later. But if Eric doesn't mind, I kind of want to move to a district that's a little bit closer to me, personally, which had a Democrat. Let's talk about the Democrats maybe a little bit. Can we move on to Pennsylvania's 10th?
I think Joanna may have wanted to say something about the back to Pennsylvania 7 before we move on.
Yes, go ahead, Johanna.
About the women candidates.
Yeah, after the 2018 midterms, there were only 13 Republican women in the House. And so Republicans have really invested a lot of energy into putting women candidates into swing state races. As a matter of fact, one has already been mentioned, Scheller in Pennsylvania, Joe mentioned. She is one of the 5 that they have nominated for these swing district races. You have Ashley Hinson in Iowa. You have Sparts in Indiana. Yvette Harrell in New Mexico, and Miller Meeks in Iowa. So you have 5 new, well, not so new, because Miller Meeks actually has 3 failed attempts from previous races. So, they're really making a hard push to get more women in the House because they've realized that in order to stay relevant, they need to kind of be where the Democrats are, or at least try to be where the Democrats are in terms of, gender equality and with Me Too. And, they're really making a push, kind of like they didn't back Steve King. They really pulled all of his resources. They, helped boost his opponent. Same thing with the women, with the female candidates. They're really trying to make a push to be more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and some of them, like Ashley Hinson, is a very, very top tier recruit for Iowa, just in general. We'll talk about that race later. Although I don't think the race itself is that competitive, but in terms of candidate recruiting quality, definitely some big wins from Elise Stefanik's group over there. Also Nancy Mace in South Carolina, 2nd Congressional District. Michelle Fischbach in the 7th of Minnesota. Lots of really good stuff.
Yeah.
For sure. So that's
I think we'll move to the Auditor General race. Yeah,
we're going to move on to the Auditor General first. Okay.
Fun race.
Oh yeah, fun race because it hasn't been called yet, and we're waiting on a lot of stuff right now. If we're not
provisional ballots,
we're not done yet in Pennsylvania because we decided to have 6 candidates run for an open row office for some reason. Thanks, guys. And Eric, if you have the map ready, you can go ahead and post it because boy, oh boy, does this look like a pride flag right now with this how this map looks?
And this is a really preliminary result so far. This isn't the full ballot. This is from the user on Twitter. His handle is @Jeff Ditzler.
This has been pretty stable. The where the counties are is pretty stable.
Yeah, but this is from him. So if you want to follow him, you can follow him. I'll make a banner here real quick just so we can credit him.
About Pennsylvania politics.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at the map here, folks, this is obviously a pretty interesting looking map. So you see a lot of this kind of red and purplish here. This red here is mostly that is Nina Ahmed. Nina Ahmed is right now in 2nd place, but a lot of people could consider her the favorite maybe to take this nomination just because of where mail-in ballots are from. A lot of those remaining mail-in ballots come from this area in the state. So that's hugely important because the first place person right now is Michael Lamb. He's leading by about 3 percentage points right now, and he's all of this blue over here because he's from Allegheny County, folks. And if you're from Allegheny County and you're the only one from Allegheny County or really in the general western southwest Pennsylvania area on the primary list in the statewide race, you're basically guaranteed to get all these counties in that race. So you can see here in you got a lot of these numbers here and a lot of these really crazy maps. You see where Scott Conklin did really well in a lot of these narrow states up here. You've got Tracy Fountain, who's from Dauphin County, doing well in some of those innermost states. The purple is Rosemarie Davis, who's from Monroe. You see her getting a lot of votes up there. Christina Hartman, who's from Lancaster County, winning, York, Lebanon, Lancaster, winning those south central states, south central counties. So in what was truly a really interesting primary, certainly one hell of a ride for sure, if people want to say. Pete, I know you've got stuff to say about this race, but certainly a heck of a ride, and we're not anywhere close to being done with this yet. We've still got probably another 2 or 3 days left of counting to go of these mail-in ballots. So, Pete, you can go ahead and take it away with your little analysis here.
Thank you, Joe. As always, pleasure. Joe's absolutely right. What he just said about the regionalization of all the 6 candidates, as you can see where they're from, with the ballots. Ben Forsyth, another great Pennsylvania politics account, basically has given a good rundown of where these ballots are likely going to come from. And they're from Delaware County, which you can see is right near this, right on the border of Philadelphia County, another county that also will be reporting in a lot of mail ballots. And that the conventional wisdom is Nina Almed should pass Michael Lamb, and that has significant implications for the race. Lamb very much is the Pittsburgh type politician that has done very well with Pennsylvania voters. Pennsylvania voters tend to like the straightforward views of that. Lamb is much more of the establishment type. He's very much your typical moderate Pennsylvania Democrat. He's pretty fiscally conservative, but socially liberal type. Nina Almed is very much a special case in this. She's very much more to the left of Pennsylvania Dems. She's from Philly, very much the progressive wing of the party. She ran for lieutenant governor back in 2018. Did pretty well with that grassroots energy, and now we'll put it on to the ballot if she does get it. If Michael Lamb were to get on the ballot, I would say Democrats feel very confident in that situation, as Lamb is a very proven winner, and Pittsburgh office officials going for statewide office tend to be very popular with Pennsylvania voters. But if it's Almed, this race becomes much more competitive, and it was going to be competitive anyway. The GOP candidate, Tim DeFore, thank you. The controller of Dauphin County, which is where the state capital, Harrisburg, is located. Very good candidate. The GOP struck a home run with him. And if it's Almed versus DeFore, that has a very good chance of being competitive and Republicans winning their first row office in the state since 2013. And Joe will love when we get to this. Dauphin is from South Central Pennsylvania, and that could be very much his key to winning that race, which will be close, I think, regardless of who wins it, but more of Almed. He has to run up his margins in Dauphin County. That is going to be very much one of the key areas where, if he wants to get that office and make state history as the first African American state controller, state auditor general, apologies. He has to do well there, and South Central PA, as Joe has mentioned many times, is going to be very key in that race and possibly in the presidential race as well. And I'll give that over to Joe now.
Yeah, no. So you did a really good job there mentioning Nina Ahmed, and if you look at Ahmed's campaign website, she mentions President Trump a lot. Her person who's running for who would control auditing the Pennsylvania state budget. She mentions President Trump quite a lot. And that sometimes causes issues in these row office races and not necessarily, those powerful races. Ahmed while I've admitted this personally, has a great backstory as an immigrant, came over, got a master's in chemistry in from Pennsylvania University, not Penn State, but the Ivy Pennsylvania University. And Ahmad's taken a lot of very progressive stances. And also she's from Philadelphia. Losing Lamb means that you're going to lose a lot of those maybe old school Democratic voters in Southwest Pennsylvania. Those voters who would probably go for President Trump, but for row office, would go for a guy from Allegheny any day of the week. Let me tell you something. They would go from a guy from Allegheny any day of the week. And to lose that, plus added in with DeFore's probably added bonus in places like Dauphin, Lancaster, Lebanon, and York, where he will probably do better than an average Republican candidate, maybe from the Philly suburbs or even the Allegheny area. DeFore has huge potential, especially in Dauphin. And this is a county that has gone blue in presidential races every year since 2008. This is not like, a usually red seat that, maybe he's gone blue once or twice. This has been a continuously blue state for the blue area for the last 3 presidential elections. DeFore has won his races there for the last 2 terms. In 2015 and 2019, he won his races there by a decent amount too. And it's huge. And Dauphin is going to be one of those battleground areas, not only for the state, but in Congress as well. And that's where we'll segue here to Pennsylvania's 10th district, where we really had the only competitive Democratic primary in the congressional races in Pennsylvania this year. And this, while it turned out to be competitive, really wasn't seen as competitive when we started out. This is the race to take on Scott Perry in Pennsylvania's 10th district, which is definitely becoming a swing district in the state. It holds both Harrisburg and York cities and all of Dauphin County, which is more generally blue, but it also holds a lot of Northern York and Cumberland, which are more typically red seat areas. And it's going to be really interesting to see where this race came out to be, because Eugene D. Pasquale, who is the current Auditor General right now, was really expected to run away with this seat. He had the money, he had the name, he had the ability, and people were like, this guy could really run away with this seat. And not only that, he's a great candidate to get. He could really take over the seat well and really potentially give Scott Perry an even harder time than he had in 2018, where he only won by 3 points. But that's not what we got on primary night. Instead, and this is something that I had kind of seen and I've kind of looked at and said, hey, this Tom Breyer kid who was running as this 25-year-old young progressive kid from Dauphin County who had grown up in Hershey and been in Dauphin County his entire life, came in and said, hey, I'm going to take a run at this seat. And it became something much more as the results slowly started to come in, mainly just from Dauphin and Cumberland. Breyer held a pretty significant lead, at one point holding a 62-38 lead with about 18% of the vote in. That changed pretty quickly, I'm not going to lie. When the part of York County came in, where D. Pasquale is from, it dropped about 81% of all the votes from York County came in for Eugene D. Pasquale, which is that huge margin that he needed to win this seat, and he got it. And it was such a huge win for him to get those numbers from York, but it was definitely a surprising night for him, and definitely a surprising night for a lot of people in that seat. And yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, Joey. You can finish up.
I'll finish up here because I do have to go in about 2 minutes, but it was a really interesting night. Breyer hit a message in which, usually shouldn't work in an area like this. These voters are going to be a lot more moderate, even the Democrats. But it also, I think, again, to go back to geographical advantages of Pennsylvania, Breyer wasn't just some Northeast transplant from New York or Massachusetts who came down to live in Harrisburg and said, you know what, I'm going to run for Congress. This is a guy who lived in Dauphin County his entire life, was a huge name basketball player there, went to college in the district, in Dickinson College, which is in the district and in Cumberland County, and has been basically a part of this district his whole life. And a lot of guys saw that as, hey, this is just a kid from this area who's trying to help. And I think it really paid off for him. He's probably going to finish with somewhere between 42-45% of the vote when this is all said and done and all those Dauphin mail-in ballots are counted. And it's got to be seen as a huge victory for him. And I think this is someone who we're probably going to see again.
Yeah, I echo what Joe has said. I think Dick Pascal was expected, I think, by many to do well and run away with this primary, but he didn't. And I think that was a very warning, I think, to him that I think this is the classic warning in politics: never take anything for granted because it will come back to bite you. I think there was a lot of arrogance on his side. They would just. This was a 25-year-old college kid, college student, 25-year-old they were running against. Would mean nothing. They'd clog on to victory, but they obviously had to put a fight up that night. And I'll give as Joe said, Breyer a lot of credit. He did well. He put the best fight, and I do expect him probably to inevitably have a very good career in state politics. Inevitably, probably running for a local, safe Democratic seat, probably in Dauphin. I think overall in the general picture. It's going to be a tight race with Pascal and Perry. I mean, Scott Perry only survived by about 2.3% in 2018 against George Scott, who most people did not see as giving Perry a fight in 2018, but he did. And I think, as Joe, the new boundaries of this seat when the redraw happened with the state Supreme Court made it much more competitive than its former seat, which was an uber-red seat, which has now changed into a more, battleground suburban seat. And I think Perry, to his credit, I mean, I've been very critical of Perry in the past for how I think he's, operated in his seat, has started to get the message and has pushed, been more active with constituents, and has also raised a good amount of money. He seems to understand now that he is in a seat now that isn't going to be, a shoo-in, that he once won in 2012. It's not going to be a seat that he has to put, the effort to win, or else he's going to lose. I think right now I'd say the seat is a toss-up, but I'd probably say, depending on what happens with the personal votes, I think Pascal is going to do well in York County. It will be close either way. I think whoever wins this race is probably going to win by less than 3 percentage points.
All right, awesome. And I think we're going to move. Joanna had wanted to mention something about Sheila Dixon in Baltimore.
Yes. Sheila Dixon is a previous mayor of Baltimore. She was actually Baltimore's first female mayor. And she's really interesting to me because she resigned in 2010 as part of a plea agreement for misappropriating funds, misappropriating charity. We're talking gift cards to poor people. So she resigned as part of a plea deal. She was convicted of or pled guilty, to felony crimes and misdemeanors. It was all over the place. And anyway, a little bit of her history. She came into the mayor's office when Martin O'Malley became governor in 2007 of Maryland, of course. And so, she had that short stint as mayor, and then a lot of scandal. And now she's running again. And so far, she's holding her lead over Brandon Scott. I'm not sure if that's been declared yet. As of 17 hours ago, it was still not decided, and they're actually really close. The numbers are really close. And Maryland has had a lot of problems with their mail-in ballots. They've had a lot of problems with lines, because everywhere is trying to observe social distancing. I know it was a problem in Washington, D.C. with, observing social distancing inside and out of the polling places. So you've got enormous lines. You've got more people than ever doing mail-in ballots. And so a lot of these races, as we've already talked about, still aren't clear. And I believe this is still one of them. But the Democratic primary for Baltimore mayor is between former mayor Sheila Dixon and I believe he's a state senator, Brandon Scott. So, but right now she's leading.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a bizarre situation to be sure.
Definitely.
So I'm going to go ahead and yeah, definitely. And I'm going to go ahead and transition into Iowa, which is a state that's very important for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
Not the least of which is that to some degree, all 4 House races have been competitive or could be competitive. Specifically, Republicans averted a major problem because Steve King, who was the incumbent in the 4th district, lost his race.
Yeah.
Pretty much every Republican I know has been universally applauding this. Even the Democratic challenger, who is going to certainly lose now because this is a seat Donald Trump won by, I believe, 30 points or some.
It was, yeah. That's right.
It's not even going to be remotely competitive at this point. As you can see here, Randy Feenstra, who was a state senator, defeated Steve King by around 10 percentage points. You had a couple of other challengers that took around 7 to 8% of the vote. There was a worry that the vote would not consolidate, the anti-Steve King vote wouldn't consolidate, and he would somehow go through. But thanks to his really strong performance in Stowe County, Lyon, just the northeastern, northwestern part of the county in general, he was able to win by a fairly comfortable margin. Most of Steve King's support came from these sort of areas around here. His home county of Crawford, see if I can find that here. As you can see, he won that county by a considerable margin, but that's only 791 votes, whereas opposed to Stowe County, you can see 6,575 votes, so a much larger margin. Definitely one that Republicans are excited about. Also, for the Senate primary, some were concerned on the Democratic side that this could be a disappointing race for Teresa Greenfield, who was the nominee that was supported by the National Party. But she ultimately won her race comfortably. She won almost twice as many votes as her nearest challenger, Michael Franken. Franken only won a single county, again, in the northwestern portion of the state. So that was good for them. And then, we're going to go to the congressional districts now. So as you can see here, Iowa has 4 congressional districts. The 4th district, all of these consist of the entirety of their specific counties. So there's no split counties in Iowa by any means in their map. So traditionally, the 4th is strongly Republican. And then the other 3 districts have leaned Democratic or been toss-ups by some margin. Republicans had, out of these districts, they had 3-to-1 advantage. They had districts 1, 4, and 3 going into the 2018 elections. They did not have the 2nd district, even though Trump had won it by around 4 percentage points. The 2nd district opened up after the incumbent Democratic Representative Dave Lobisak retired. And this was the district that Republicans thought they could be competitive in. They were excited about kind of the potential of having a 4-0 split because there's a good likelihood Trump wins all 4 districts again. Unfortunately, the nominees weren't really top tier. The winner was Marionette Miller Meeks, who defeated former Congressman from Illinois, Bobby Schilling, by around 11 percentage points. She's a perennial candidate. She's not really someone you would expect to be a top tier recruit, and already some local Republicans have kind of endorsed the Democrat Rita Hart over her in that seat. So that's not looking to be a great Republican pickup. A bright spot for Republicans is Ashley Hinson, who we mentioned earlier. She comfortably won her seat. She won every county in her seat. The 1st district, which stretches over into Cedar Rapids, Cedar Falls, Dubuque, lots of places that, and it's a good seat for Republicans. Traditionally, Republicans have been better in the 3rd district than in a lot of the other seats. But specifically the 3rd district, even though Trump won the 3rd district, he did worse in the 3rd district than any in the state. Trump had only managed to win, I think, 48-45, while he won the 1st and 2nd districts 49-45. This is after Romney had only lost the 3rd by 4 percentage points in 2012, while losing the 1st and the 2nd by 12 or 13 percentage points. So the 3rd district, over on the Republican side, the winner was David Young. He beat Bill Schaefer. I'm not really sure if this is going to be as competitive a race as they would want. I think the general consensus is that the 3rd district is Sidney Axne. The Democratic candidate is in a pretty good position. So in all likelihood, the situation we're looking at here is one where Republicans managed to hold the 4th district by a considerable margin. There was concern that having Steve King in that seat would result in the rest of the vote in the state tanking a little bit because Republicans would defect from Steve King, who is, of course, known for white nationalist, racist statements on a regular basis for almost the entirety of his congressional tenure. But specifically lately, he endorsed a white supremacist nominee for mayor of Toronto, of all places, for some reason. He was calling camera talking about complaining about how white nationalism is a bad term now. Republicans had taken him off of all committees. There seemed to have been some push from Kevin McCarthy to allow him back in if he managed to win his primary. The rest of the steering committee pretty much told McCarthy he could get in his butt. There was just no appetite to keep Steve King around in any sense of the word, and they were lucky they managed to win that race.
Yeah.
The first district, which is of course the one with Ashley Hinson, the Democratic nominee is Abby Finkenauer. She is a good candidate. She's young, but Ashley Hinson is a former news reporter. She won a competitive state district in 2018. It was a district that went for Hillary Clinton by 2 percentage points, so this wasn't a district that you would think would flip like that, but she did well. She's generally respected in the area, and she's considered a top-tier Republican recruit. So if I were looking at the races, I would look at the first as the most likely to flip, and then the second would probably be more likely to flip than the third at this point, just because the suburban hold in the third district is a little bit more than in the other two districts. But really, the look at Iowa, the Senate district as well, Joni Ernst is generally considered to have some sort of advantage over Teresa Greenfield. There's debate over how much the advantage is and whether the advantage could hold if Trump loses Iowa. But generally speaking, I think the race is considered to be a little bit less competitive than the presidential one. So that's just kind of a quick rundown of Iowa. Definitely a recruiting win for Republicans with Ashley Hinson, but kind of a blunder in the other two districts that should have been places they would think would have a better nominee in. But unfortunately for the Republican side, you're only as good as the candidate you have, and they don't seem to have very good candidates in either of those districts. Go ahead, Peter. I think you had something to say about Iowa.
Yeah, I agree with your points entirely. I think with Steve King, for National Republicans, this was a big win. It got rid of one of their Achilles heels. And in that seat, Franny Frista, popular local state senator, will almost certainly win it. So it avoids them having to throw money into a race that could been competitive with King, and it's a good day for the country itself. On Iowa first with Ashley Hinson, I think Hinson's one of the best recruits the GOP has recruited in the entire country. I think she's a strong candidate, but so is Abby Finkenauer. Also, I think is a strong candidate. So I think this is going to be a farm burner to the end. I think it's going to be close, and I think both are very strong women who will both give each other a good challenge. I agree also with Iowa 3. Republican nominee there, I believe, is the former congressman who lost in 2018. The suburban edge of it probably doesn't help it, and having Des Moines also helps the Democrats in a good presidential year as well. And then last, with the Iowa second seat, as mentioned, the Republican nominee Miller has already run into problems in the past with losing races, and now has local Republicans running against her. I think out of all the seats, I think probably the most likely to flip, as noted, is Iowa 1. And I think the other seats are probably going to all stay within their respective parties at the time. And I think with the Senate race, Teresa Greenfield has had her all, different views depending on who you ask for the Democratic Party. I still think Joni Ernst is the favorite for that race. I think the question is the margin, and if Trump is in a bad position come the fall, is she in danger of being taken out in a wave type scenario? But that we have to still find out, and that's still months away.
Yeah, there's been questions about Teresa Greenfield, mainly as she's very good when she has a script. She's very good when she's has a pre-recorded campaign ad, which is very compelling. She had the story about her husband. She's a widow. Her husband died early, and she was able to survive off of union benefits and Social Security. So really compelling story for her. The problem is she seems to have difficulty in nailing down basic policy. She was in a conference call and was basically asked some really basic policy questions and seemed to kind of fumble the ball a little bit, whereas opposed to Joni Ernst, who was known to be pretty solid on the stump and in terms of being able to discuss issues like that pretty well. So the question will be if she'll be able to hold up in the debates, which will certainly happen, or whether she'll have to kind of try specifically into anti-Trump sentiment, assuming Trump manages to lose Iowa, which is again uncertain given he won the state by a considerable margin in 2016. So we'll see how Iowa goes. Definitely a state to look at. Definitely a state that Democrats are excited. Hopefully they can get a little bit of strength back in. But this is, again, a very white state. Even though those three districts reach into urban areas, a lot of their strength comes from the fact that Republicans are concentrated into the 4th district to kind of an unnatural degree relative to the rest of the state. So they kind of got the luck of a good map here. But we'll see how things go, going into the 2020 elections and into redistricting. And I believe, Joanna, you want to mention something about the Montana governor's race, which is another interesting race to look at. That was a primary that was held last on June 2nd as well.
Yes, Greg Gianforte. He okay. He was Montana's only congressman. What? I'm sorry, I missed it. Okay.
Body slammer. His infamous thing with the reporter.
Yes. He was convicted for assault on a reporter. Yes, I'm getting all the colorful characters here. But anyway, he was Montana's only congressman, and of course he lost to Steve Bullock. In 2016. So he won the seat, the House seat in 2017 in a special election. And that was, of course, after he was charged with assaulting a reporter. But now Lieutenant Governor Cooney will face off with Gianforte for the to be Montana governor. So, and forgetting everything here, Gianforte is, of course, the Republican candidate, and Lieutenant Governor Cooney is the Democrat. So, yeah, it should be an interesting race, and it's also expected to be the most expensive governor's race of 2020. So.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of governor races in presidential years. Most of them are in off years. North Carolina has a gubernatorial race. A couple other states do, but it's not that common to have one that way.
Yeah, so it's expected to be very expensive. I imagine media markets will be, expensive. So running any kind of ads or, but one good thing about it is they can lump into. Not that campaigning will be the way we typically think of it, canvassing. There won't be a lot of canvassing this cycle, most likely. But one good thing about it, with Senate candidates, with House candidates, they've been able to historically, ride the coattails of the presidential candidate, like in 2012 with Obama, Tim Kaine. Was able to kind of latch on the coattails and, people distributed literature at the same time for all of the candidates. So that's one advantage to having it, although it makes it more expensive in the long run.
Yeah, and there's going to be a competitive Senate race in Montana as well.
Right.
I'll pull up this map Adam showed, provided of the Montana media markets. But I want to mention one quick fact. A lot of people don't know this about Montana. Is they have a unique law that was Greg Gianforte was generally considered to be the prohibitive favorite, regardless, because if a Montana race is not decided by a majority in the primary, the top two competitors face off in a cage match. For obvious reasons, Greg Gianforte was considered the prohibitive favorite because of that.
Wow.
To be clear, that's a joke. That's not real, but
yeah, sounds right.
But these are the Montana media markets. You got Great Falls. The capital, Helena, Glendive, Spokane, Washington metro area crosses over, Missoula, Bozeman, Montana, and then you got Bismarck, North Dakota market, Glendive, and then Rapid City, South Dakota, as well as Billings. So that's kind of the basic look of where the Montana races will be shown, or where ads will have to be distributed.
Right.
And I believe Adam, I don't know if you had something to say after or.
Oh, I remember the original race was right around the time there was that whole scandal of the United flight attendants. So I was, so what we were all looking for then was the fight. Who would win, the United flight attendants or Greg Gianforte?
Well, I think the answer, I mean, it just kind of boggles my mind he managed to win a race after literally assaulting someone and being convicted of assault as a sitting congressman. But apparently Montana has different standards for elected officers than other states. It could be that state law. There could be other things, but who knows? One thing again is we're going to be covering elections live next week as well. There's several states are having primaries on June 9th as well as in the future. Obviously, South Carolina, Nevada, Georgia, North Dakota, and Nevada, I believe, are states that have primaries June 9th. New York's primaries are also coming up, and Adam kind of has a good rundown of some of the ones to look at in New York, which is a safely Democratic state, but does have some races that are interesting in terms of primary level and the general elections as well.
Right. So with New York, there's quite a few competitive races that are coming up. So in terms of, just to begin with this, let me pull up my list here. So with this, starting off with the first district has been trending right for a while. Well, it's based out in the western, right, so it's based out in, not western, eastern portion of Suffolk County. So it's a bit suburban, bit urban, and you have a mix because you have out in that area where you see Montauk, really where the two forks split there, or the Hamptons, and it's very wealthy. A lot of city folks own second houses out there. And then more interior area, you have an area, you have a surprisingly high white working class area, but you also have a lot of the traditional North Shore Long Island Republicans, and then you also, it's diversifying a bit. So last time the Democrats ran Perry Gershon, who is a businessman, but Gershon was a weak candidate because he didn't have local ties, and Zeldin is just a popular incumbent for the area. Zeldin, by the way, his district was held by Democrat Tim Bishop for a while, and then Zeldin came in the 14 wave. So in this race, it's a bit of a competitive primary because you have Gershon, who's running again. You have Bridget Fleming, who's a Suffolk County legislator, and then you have Nancy Goroff, who's the chair of Stony Brook University, which is a university in the district. It's a public state university. It has, I believe, 26,000-ish students, and so significant presence in the district, who's also running. And we also don't know what's going to happen because there's not a lot of good polling. The Fleming campaign released an internal which showed her beating Goroff narrowly with Gershon well behind. There's been, Gershon released a poll back in January showing him up 20-something points. But it's really not a lot to say. And the other thing to remember is that this is the most conservative of the Long Island seats, and it's been trending right in the Trump era. This is a district which, give me a second, I want to make sure I get this one right. This is a district that Obama won by 4 in 2008. He won by 1 in 2012, and that he only won it because of Hurricane Sandy, because of his response to it. And then Trump won it by 12 points in 2016. So you have a rightward trending area. So regardless of who wins, it's a likely R race. Zeldin's the clear favorite.
And he's generally considered popular in his district. He's a Jewish Republican. Seems like a pretty solid fit for the district as a whole.
Right. He's one of, I believe, 2 congressional Jewish Republicans, the other being David Kustoff in Tennessee's 8th Congressional District. He's popular, and really, it'll be competitive, but I don't see Zeldin losing. So I do definitely think Goroff has the strongest chance of any of the Democrats who could win this. She clearly has the best TV presence just based on what I'm seeing in New York City, and all of Long Island's New York City media market. So yeah, with that, I think we should move on to some of the New York City primaries. So the most interesting one is the 15th, but before that, we'll just cover the 9th, the 10th, and the 12th quickly, since those are also important. The 9th congressional district was shockingly close last time. A very progressive Democrat, a very progressive Democrat, Boone Cadecco, I believe that's how it's pronounced, almost beat Yvette Clarke on the same night that AOC defeated Joe Crowley. This time, Boone Cadecco is back, and in addition, Chaim Deutsch, who is a conservative Democrat, I believe Orthodox Jewish city councilman, and is also running this primary. So Yvette Clarke remains the favorite until there's any evidence otherwise. But this does have the potential to be an interesting race to watch on election night. And then it's the 10th and 12th district.
Yes.
The 10th district, on just looking at the map, does not appear to make a lot of sense. You have the Upper West Side, you have Lower Manhattan. When you say Jerry Nadler represents Wall Street, it's a literal statement. And it also is, you can see in that portion there in Brooklyn, you have a Hasidic Jewish section of Brooklyn Borough Park, which is a sizable portion of the district. I believe it's about 10% of the population. But the district is primarily dominated by Reform Jews who live on the Upper West Side. And while the census doesn't collect statistics on it, it is considered to be widely viewed as being the most heavily Jewish district in the country.
Mm-hmm. And the 10%, the 10% Orthodox Jew makes sense, because if you look at the vote for the primary Jerry Nadler had a few years back, the Orthodox Jewish candidate against Nadler won about 10% of the Democratic primary, which it kind of a good baseline to look at there, I think, given the lean of the district. Right.
So primary challenging Nadler is Lindsey Boylan, and she's almost certainly not going anywhere in this. Nadler's an extremely popular incumbent. I remember so often Nadler is always on the outside the elementary school 2 blocks from me, shaking hands with voters. He's a very well-liked, very popular incumbent. Gets stuff done for the district in addition to his national profile. This is just interesting because Boylan threw a bit of a Twitter fit a few weeks ago when Warren endorsed Nadler. And Socialist Twitter continues to convince themselves that Boylan has a chance to beat Nadler here.
I mean, Boylan is probably going to do best in an Orthodox Jewish portion just as a protest against Nadler, if anything.
Yeah.
Like, she's not going to do well in the Manhattan part. They really don't understand that district, I don't think.
They don't.
No, they really don't.
I mean, I don't want to be rude to anyone who watches from Socialist Twitter, but you have to. It's kind of like you have to set reasonable standards for where you can take candidates from. There are lots of other seats in New York City that are way better opportunities for you to take than the 10th district.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Just because AOC happened in Queens and the Bronx doesn't mean it's going to happen literally everywhere else in New York City.
Yep. And then finally, the New York's 12th congressional district has been repped by Carolyn Maloney since 1993. She actually defeated a liberal Republican. I don't mean moderate Republican, I mean liberal Republican, Bill Green, back in 1992 for the district. Funny enough, she won it because of the addition of Queens portions that have actually been the most solidly against her in recent primaries. But she defeated Green in what's always been the Silk Stocking district in Manhattan. And back in 2018, she was also in a surprisingly close primary against Suraj Patel, who is a professor at NYU. Patel has encountered a lot of controversy because back in 2018, he decided the best way to campaign would be to create a fake Tinder account to advertise his policy positions. Unfortunately, catfish voters weren't as excited.
I'm going to show that Manhattan district real quick of Bill Green, just because I find that fascinating. Since I managed to pull that up from but you can see Bill Green's district right here, stretched along that side of Manhattan. The last Republican to represent a part of New York
Last
that's
Republican
not in
Manhattan.
Yeah, that's not the Staten Island seat. We've had pretty poor luck everywhere else for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Oh, you did have Bob Turner for half a term when thanks to Anthony Weiner.
Oh yeah, well that was a fluke. That was a definition of a fluke win. I mean, if you look at the history of races, candidates do very poorly when they are preceded. They're trying to replace someone of the same party who had a sexual scandal. You can even just look at Mike Garcia in California 25. He won that seat by a considerable margin. That probably won't happen the same margin in November, but it's just a poor track record of when candidates do that. Aside from that one race against Anthony Weiner, we've had pretty poor luck. And that seat was redrawn. It was actually a marginally competitive seat, right? That was redrawn after the.
It was trending right.
Yep, it was eliminated in redistricting as New York City lost a seat, and it was the logical one to get rid of.
Yeah, did that have some of the Orthodox communities, or was that some other part of Brooklyn?
It did. I believe it had areas surrounding the Orthodox communities that were more white working class, but the Orthodox community, I believe, has been in Adler's district continuously since the 1990s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you look at it on a map, South Brooklyn is actually surprisingly Republican or competitive compared to the rest of the county, although it's substantially less populated than the rest of Brooklyn.
Yes, South Brooklyn is much more white working class than the rest of the borough, which is extremely diverse. I actually campaigned in Bensonhurst for Max Rose in 2018. And, you see everyone there, or you see a growing Chinese population. You see the sweetest Italian grandmothers. You see, it's a really a diverse area of the city. But anyhow, going back to New York's 12th congressional district, which is a mix of Western Queens and then the east side of Manhattan. Suraj Patel is running against Maloney, but also you have Lauren Ashcroft, who is a DSA candidate. She has the endorsement of such national figures as Marianne Williamson and Paula Jean from West Virginia.
Has she been endorsed by Joshua for Congress yet? That's the question.
That's the critical question there.
That's where they're going to pull her over the top.
Yes. But anyhow, with this one, with the progressive wing of the party splitting their votes two ways, Maloney is a solid candidate for renomination and in this safely blue seat for re-election. But always into that. And then finally, there's an assembly district within New York 12 represented by Rebecca Seawright, which Seawright screwed up her nominating petitions. And so she'll probably end up having to run a write-in campaign. It's a safely blue district. She'll win on a write-in campaign, but it will waste Democratic Party resources. And it will be.
Which part of Manhattan is this in?
Oh, that's the Upper East Side. That's my grandmother lives on 79th Street. That's her district. It's a safely blue area. It's your typical New York City white liberal area.
Mm-hmm. Well, to be fair, it's hard to find a district, an area in Manhattan that is not a safely blue area at this point.
Yes. Not sure how many Republican-leaning precincts are left on the island of Manhattan, but I can.
Who's the last Republican to win is like a state legislative seat in Manhattan?
Yeah, I believe it was Liz Kruger, which is the Upper East Side state senator, won it from a Republican back in 2002, I want to say.
Oh, wow.
But it's always been at the top of the ballot, a very blue area, even as it's retained its down ballot Republican identity. That dates, it's decades now, until the early 21st century, late 20th century. But then to get into the interesting race is New York's 15th congressional district, the bluest district in the country, where the longtime incumbent Jose Serrano is retiring due to complications from Parkinson's disease.
Parkinson's.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So with this district, you have a very interesting situation where a prominent socially conservative Democrat, Ruben Diaz, this is the guy who's made a very prominent, loud stance, and against abortion, against gay marriage, and he appears to be the favorite at the moment in this primary. So you might be wondering how, in the bluest district in the country, a district that Obama won 97-3, would you elect someone who could quite possibly be the most conservative Democrat in the House if he wins? Well, Diaz, this is an area that's heavily Hispanic, where a lot of the older Hispanic voters might appreciate Diaz's stances, but it's also a district that's overwhelmingly poor, overwhelmingly dependent on a lot of government aid. And Diaz, who has gotten a reputation for his excellent constituency services, is really going to benefit from that during these times. Because what they're going to say, well, Diaz did an X thing for me or Y thing for me in the past, I'll support him. And because of that. So he has that going. And then you also have a split Democratic primary, because naturally when a 97-3 seat opens up, you have a lot of Democrats who are going to show up to run. And so the popular narrative on this has become, well, they're all going to get, 15% of the vote and Diaz is going to slip by. But I actually think that popular narrative is a bit off. And the reason why is because a lot of the Democrats are stronger on paper than they are in reality, which is you have Michael Blake, who's a state assemblyman and the vice chair of the DNC, who's running. He's going to get a good share of the vote. You have Richie Torres, who appears to be the establishment favorite. He's a state assemblyman also, or is he state assemblyman? No, sorry, the city councilman. He's also going to get a good chunk of the vote. But beyond that, you don't actually have a lot going on in addition, beyond Blake, Diaz, and Torres, because Melissa Mark Vivatero, who is the former speaker of the city council, has underperformed expectations in every race she's running for years now. She ran in the public advocate election against, that was won by Jumaane Williams a year ago after Letitia James resigned and became state attorney general. She wildly underperformed the polls and expectations. She came in third place behind the Republican running in the race, incredibly.
He wasn't running on the Republican line. He had some sort of different, he had like a different stealth line.
Right. It's New York City Public Advocate is a nominally nonpartisan position, so everyone gets to form their own ballot line under their own name. So he had some name, something pragmatism based, something to that extent. And so Vivatero has always underperformed expectations. And frankly, if historical precedent is any indicator, I think Vivatero will continue to underperform expectations and probably not draw as large a share of the vote in the primary as people think. And then beyond that, Ydanis Rodriguez, who's a city councilman, is running, and he appears to be a strong candidate on paper. But the problem is that Ydanis doesn't actually represent a single square inch of this district currently as a city councilman. And you see, Ydanis represents Inwood and Washington Heights, which are in the 13th district, but he's running in the 15th district. So I think that he really doesn't have the name recognition that he's going to need to win this. And I think he's also going to underperform expectations. And then finally, you have Semelis Lopez, who's the DSA candidate in the race. She's gotten a lot of attention from that. But the problem is that, like many DSA candidates, all of her supporters on Twitter and actual polling, like the one which Data for Progress did, showed her only getting 2% of the votes in the among primary voters. It was a likely voter pool. Well, so really, even though the narrative is, the Democrats are going to split the vote 6 ways and Diaz will win 20% of the vote, really the bar for Diaz is considerably higher to be able to win this, because the only Democrats who have serious candidacies are, again, Diaz, Blake, and Torres.
Mm-hmm. And I believe you mentioned a scenario where if he does win even if he does win the primary, he's not safely assured of election in the seat, remarkably enough.
Right. So New York State is known for its arcane election laws. including fusion voting, which is New York State, anyone who gets at least 1% of the vote in the previous gubernatorial election gets to put a candidate on their line in any single race. So the Working Families Party almost always endorses the Democratic candidate in these races, and you can vote for the Democratic candidate on the Democratic line or the Working Families Party's line. But Diaz is the few Democrats who the Working Families Party will refuse to put on their line. And so to be able to appear on a ballot line other than for your own party, you have to be granted a certificate of consent from that party. That's because in the mid to late 1940s, the American Labor Party, which is no longer existent, would run its own candidates in Democratic and Republican primaries, which is how in one election in 1948, a socialist, Vito Marcantonio, managed to become the Republican and Democratic nominee in one district. Right. So because of that, the state assemblyman and Malcolm Wilson, who later became governor, and state senator Erwin Pakula passed a law which Governor Dewey signed and is still in effect to this day, which basically means that parties have to give certificates of consent and to any candidate from outside their party to appear on their line, or as it's informally known, a Wilson-Pakula Act of the law makers. So flatly, the Working Families Party is not going to give a Wilson-Pakula to Diaz, so Torres will probably end up on the line, or maybe Blake, but probably Torres in the event that Diaz is the nominee, in which case you're going to have a competitive general election. The Republican vote really isn't a sizable enough percentage to be a vote for Diaz. So you're going to relitigate
again.
Yeah. So you're just going to relitigate the primary.
It's the angry white Yankee fan. The angry white Yankee fan for Diaz Jr. to win in this race, folks. It'll be the angry white Yankee fan. That 3% of the Republican vote right there. The angry white Yankee fan.
Archie Bunker's son.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking, this is the one time if normally I'm a fan of both parties should have candidates running in every seat in the country. I'm normally a fan of that. And I don't want Diaz to win, even though it would be hilarious if he won. He is just a horrible person. I do not think he should be
really
anywhere near office. I'm just kind of surprised the Republicans fielded a nominee, given they could effectively net a seat off of this if Diaz were to win. I've joked about a scenario where he wins and then flips to the Republican Party, and then all of a sudden you have a 97 at the Obama seat with a conservative Afro-Caribbean, social conservative
storyline for 2021.
Yeah, Trump could claim that he's winning the black vote. He's doing really well.
He's not winning safe Democrats.
It would just be absurd, but it's not an unlikely scenario if that were to happen for some nonsense. But thankfully, it seems like if that Wilson whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mouth is weird, but thankfully, it seems like that's an option for most other states do not have, where they can deal with this. I know South Carolina has fusion voting as well. It's not very common. I like the idea. Definitely an interesting part of New York politics, to be sure. I think there was one other congressional district that what was the Elliot Engel district that he's kind of been in some hot water lately because of the hot mic comment?
New York 17.
Yes, New York 17 congressional.
17, 14.
17
is that's a whole other issue.
16, sorry, 16.
16.
17 Democrat out of that.
So Elliot Engel is the longtime Democratic incumbent. He first won election in 1988 after Mario Biaggi, who was an infamously corrupt conservative Democrat, finally got busted on a corruption charge. So he won, and he's been a solidly liberal, a bit to the left of the Democratic Party center for a while, but a solid liberal guy who's risen to become the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman. It's worth noting that while he's solid liberal on social and economic issues, he's fairly hawkish. He was one of the congressional leaders who was urging Bill Clinton to bomb Serbia to protect Kosovo in the 1990s. He supported the Iraq War. Worth considering that when we start this. He was getting a primary challenge from Jamal Bowman, who's a public school teacher from the district. And and this is while this was a competitive election prior to these comments, it's gotten particular attention because of these comments, and because Engel was at an event outside of his district, was actually at a street corner that was on the line separating 13 and 15, and various Bronx elected officials were speaking on something related to I don't recall what it was. And Engel asked the Bronx Borough President, Ruben Diaz Jr., the son of the Ruben Diaz Sr. we've just been talking about for this whole race. Engel asked Ruben Diaz Jr. if he could have a moment to talk, and he said that I wouldn't be asking about this if I didn't have a primary. Which is probably one of the more tone-deaf things you can say if you're facing a competitive primary. But so this has gotten a ton of attention. Bowman's raised, I think, about $1 million since that comment. And yep, and it's turning into a competitive election, and because of that. But it is worth noting that Engel's a longtime incumbent, and there are lots of groups in the district that like him for all sorts of reasons, and he really does get things done for the district. He's gotten the MTA to consider adding, stations along Metro North tracks to improve services to the district. He's done all sorts of things that have created jobs in the district. So he does have popularity from that, but in an increasingly diverse district, it's not the same place that elected him in 1988. In this election, really, I don't think anyone knows who's going to win between Engel or Bowman.
Mm-hmm. And it's definitely something you don't want to be caught on. I mean, there's few things I think that can be worse caught on a hot mic than what Elliot Engel got caught saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you know that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, it's not the greatest thing to say, especially when you have a competitive primary with someone like Bowman, who's saying I'm change against someone who's been there for 1 years, and basically the longtime rep is saying, why do I have to care about a primary? Shrug. It just builds a narrative up of he's out of touch with the district, and that he should be replaced. It doesn't help that if he was trying to give himself the worst possible way of getting himself to lose his seat, he basically gifted himself that. Now, Adam is right. It's going to probably be close. I think it obviously is a changing seat. Obviously, still Engel has his very supportive constituents, a lot of the Jewish community, which he's very popular for because of his pro-Israel stances, and also, as he noted, Elliot Engel also has got a lot of things done for the district. So it could be interesting with the community thing. The irony is that while that seat could go to somewhere on the left, the nearby neighboring seat, Lowry's outgoing seat, a former member of the Independent Democratic Caucus, David Carlucci, could very well win a primary in a very safe Democratic seat, which is something, especially considering how the Independent Democratic Caucus fell apart in the last few years, would be quite, kind of a remarkable and kind of almost a humorous laugh at National Democrats. I'll let the rest of you take that.
Well, Adam, do you mind if I take this a little bit here?
Oh, feel free to.
So you mentioned that Lowry's seat is a pretty reliably Democratic district. It's the 17th district right there, in getting closer to upstate New York. But I think we have to remember, though, if we want to look towards the future, New York is going to lose a congressional seat, and that the 17th district, to stay afloat, is probably going to have to take a lot more of what's in that 18th district there, and that's a lot more red. And this is very much potentially a district where we could see, it become a little bit more of a toss-up potentially type of seat. Not maybe a pure toss-up seat, but we're probably going to see become less Democratic than it is now. So, that's something to think about. Maybe that's understanding why Carlucci is popular right now among some, is saying that, hey, this is coming up. We might be taking in more of this. We might be taking in more of this more conservative population. And I can keep this seat past 2022. And I think he might not have a poor claim to that. And I know that a lot of people have really bad memories of the IDC. They let Republicans control the New York State Senate for 4 or 6 more years, more than they should have. But it's an interesting type of thing. And it's an interesting type of thing to look at. So You know, Adam, you're
They
the
do
new.
still exist.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
The Independent Democrats still do exist as a caucus within the Democratic group, but you can kind of see the whole just complete mess the New York State Senate has been for generally the entirety of the last decade. Thanks to people like that has enamored some bad will among that side. You see up there, you have the Democratic caucus, which are SDC, then the Independent Democrats, then you have SF, which is not Sinn Féin. That is a Simcha Felder, who is kind of a one-man caucus within the both sides of the legislature. An Orthodox Jew represents Borough Park, some of the other Orthodox Jewish communities, and his voting generally falls along that line, not Republican or Democratic. I believe there's also a couple. I know Republicans lost a couple of seats in New York in the 2018 elections. How are those primaries looking? I'm going to go pull up again this congressional map, but I know Nicole Maliotakis is the considerable favorite in the 11th district, but some of the ones upstate have kind of seen recruitment failures, like I believe the 22nd district, along with some other ones.
Sure, I'm happy to discuss those. So in the 11th congressional district, Nicole Maliotakis has gotten the Republican nomination, whether or not officially yet. I think she has a nominal challenger. She's the de facto nominee in this district. And Maliotakis seems like a promising candidate on paper. She ran against de Blasio back in 2017 for the mayor. She lost considerably, but she did win the district by a solid margin. And so she seems like and she's an assemblywoman from the district. So she seems like she's a strong candidate, but I think she's a lot weaker going into the general than people all think she's going to be. I think she hasn't run a good candidacy. I think Rose is exceedingly popular in the district. Rose understands the diverse communities in the district, which really you have three distinct groups to look at, which is South Staten Island is white working class heavy, a lot of Irish and Italian cops in particular. Or the Staten Island Expressway, Interstate 278, is really a dividing line there. The area south of that is white working class, either works in Staten Island or they work in areas near Staten Island and in working class professions. The area north of it is much more educated, much more diverse, and primarily works in Manhattan. And then you also have the Brooklyn portion, which has an eclectic mix of groups. It's everything from Orthodox Jews to a longtime Hispanic community to a growing Asian community. Just everything you can imagine that's there, it's there. So that'll be an interesting race. People have been calling it a toss-up. I think Rose is definitely the favorite going into. I think toss-up is a little generous to Maliotakis. I'd probably put it lean D personally. If you think I'm wish casting, feel free to say so. But
yeah, Trump is going to still win it by a considerable margin. It is a New York City district. It's not as conservative as it could be. It could easily be drawn to be redder. It wasn't, but yeah, I've not been impressed by Maliotakis personally. I think she's a good candidate on paper, like you said, but she's just sort of been having difficulty catching steam against Next Rose, who did defeat Dan Donovan by a good margin in that district.
Right, and then Dan Donovan also had the benefits of he was the popular longtime county DA from Staten Island. And, Maliotakis had some name recognition from her mayoral run. She has her name recognition from her state assemblywoman run. But Donovan, and it was just a lot. Donovan might have been a bit asleep at the wheel during his campaign, but he did have a lot more recognition to begin with as a congressman and as the DA before that.
Mm-hmm. No, I could be wrong, but I was thinking, I had looked at the mayoral results, and Maliotakis actually did substantially better in Queens than she did in Brooklyn. I've been thinking it's the Brooklyn portion that might trip her up in this, because it is a considerable amount of people in that part of the district. Right. She did not do as well in Brooklyn as she did in Queens, and even though the two are about fairly similar if you look at the presidential level in terms of how they vote.
Right, Queens has far more ancestral Republicans in it. Some parts of Queens, like Middle Village, still elected Republicans at the local level in the early 21st century. There's a lot more ancestral Republicans who Maliotakis could win in Queens and that. And then beyond that, you have a lot more moderates like College Point for Maliotakis to win than in Brooklyn. But moving past this, the next district that the Republicans lost to the Democrats flipped in 2018 is the 19th congressional district. And here the Republicans have really swung and missed on this, if you ask me, where you have two candidates, Ola Huameh, who's a fashion designer and philanthropist, and Kyle Vanderwater, who's an attorney and a veteran. And here, neither of those candidates have any real name recognition. Huameh, I believe, she moved to the district actually fairly recently from Missouri, of all places. So when you see, remember back to 2018, John Faso trying to attack Delgado from being out of the area, which was not a fair and, frankly, a racist criticism of Delgado, or racially tinged criticism, considering that he's a lifelong resident of the district. This is a real carpetbagger you have here with Huameh. And frankly, I think Trump could carry this district again. I think Trump will probably carry this district again. But I think Delgado is a solid bet for re-election because Republicans have just really swung through a pitch here, or a hittable pitch here on this district.
Yeah, Fossa was a fairly moderate representative in Congress, and the district went to Trump. It went for Obama by around 7 percentage points in both of his races, 7 or 8, and it went for Trump by around 6 or 7. So it's, on paper, it's a district that he could do well in. Is it predominantly working class, or is there some more educated areas around Albany, perhaps? Where's the area of strength Delgado has that's kind of going to put him over the top, if you don't mind me asking?
Sure. So this district has all sorts of different voting groups in the Hudson Valley. But if you zoom in, Dutchess County, a lot of the population there is in Maloney's district, but Dutchess County is a solidly Democratic county. It swung considerably to Trump, and Hillary still won it. And Delgado is going to net votes there. Ulster County has a lot of small towns that lean Democratic. It actually has a sizable number of ex-hippies who vote for Democrats. And then Columbia County, additionally, is decently Democratic leaning. To my knowledge, I believe I might be getting that one wrong. So you just have all sorts of groups there. And so really you just have a lot of small towns throughout the district that are just full of democratically leaning voters, even if the more rural parts are Republican leaning.
Mm-hmm. And I think the 22nd has a similar story if you look at the diversity of that district, stretching from, from college areas in Binghamton to Utica, which is a more liberal area as well. And that's another recruiting failure for Republicans.
Yes. So when I say the Republicans swung through a pitch on New York 19, they swung through a total meatball on New York 22 here. Republicans could have recruited anyone, really. Any random person from New York 22. They could have recruited the Broome County, which is Binghamton District Attorney. They could have recruited any county official from Oneida County, which is Utica and Rome. But they picked Claudia Tenney. That's right, she's back. And
she's back and better than ever.
She's back and ready to blow more seats for Republicans than ever. So to say Brindisi purely won because of Tenney back in 2018, that would be a bit of an understatement. And this is a district that's loved moderate Republicans like Richard Hanna, rest in peace, and Sherwood Bollard for a while. And Tenney is just not a fit for the district at all. Utica is actually an ancestrally Republican city. It only being more Democratic in recent years, but even as an Obama-Trump area. But Republicans just really missed on this one of getting Tenney to run again. And I do believe she has a little bit of competition in this from George Phillips, who's a former nominee from the area, from a previous incarnation of the district. But Tenney's the presumptive nominee at this point. And this race, which should be, it's the most Trumpy district the Democrats flipped in 18, a district that should be a easier than most pickup for Republicans, has moved solidly towards the Democrat because of Tenney's personal dislikability.
And this is the rare McCain-Romney-Trump district in New York. Trump, it was close for both McCain and Romney if you look at the current lines, but Trump won it by a considerable double-digit margin. So you would think, Republicans would be smart here and run someone like maybe Elise Stefanik in the 21st, run someone in her vein in the 22nd, and kind of hold that seat for quite a while. But they seem to not get the hint because Claudia Tenney is very socially conservative, very outrageous. Frankly, it's kind of a crime to have a very good candidate, John Katko, in the 24th, who seems pretty well set for re-election. And that's a very Democratic district. If you look at it down ballot, it's a D +4 or 5 seat, not a district Trump won. They have a better candidate in the 24th and the 22nd. Kind of slim pickings for them in upstate New York, it seems like.
Yes. Upstate New York is very ancestry Republican. It was really interesting. It was solidly Republican up until, the 80s and 90s. It starts to move towards the Democrats under Clinton, under Obama. It just moves right back to the Republicans under Trump.
If it were a state, it would be one of the most competitive states in the country. If you look at it depends on if you include Westchester in it or not. If you count out Westchester, Rockland, some of the New York City suburbs, it's pretty reasonably Republican. But even with those in there, it still would have only gone for Clinton by a very small margin. After going for Democrats for probably 10 to 20 years under both Clinton, Kerry, Gore, Obama. And with New York, you're losing a congressional district. It's going to be interesting to see how this goes because you're going to see some renumbering. That's going to affect the renumbering will affect upstate, but the district is going to come out from more like the center area, right? Even parts of New York City. If I recall from what I've drawn.
Well, New York is going to lose either 1 or 2 districts. It's really hard to say at the moment. They're definitely losing, I think, at least 1. So I think it's a consensus view that regardless of who wins in New York 15, particularly true of Diaz does, but the consensus view that district is getting dismantled no matter what. But AOC's district will probably lose a sizable chunk of the Queens portion to try to make Grace Meng's district, to expand the population of Meng's district, and probably to add to the Asian population a bit. But the Democrats But then we're going to take advantage of the fact that they're going to have full redistricting control for the first time, probably ever, actually.
That seems like a supermajority, right? If they get a supermajority in the state Senate, they can just kind of bypass the commission and do whatever they want.
Right. And I don't know the current ratings for each state Senate district. You can consult Chaz Nuttycombe, who does great ratings on a lot of that stuff. But New York State Senate seems like a solid flip to the Democrats for the supermajority. And if that happens, they can draw whatever they want. So Democrats can take advantage of the fact, like putting Ithaca in New York's 23rd district, which is not competitive, is wasting tens of thousands of Democratic votes from the massively blue city. They can take advantage of the fact that Syracuse and Onondaga as a whole is put with much redder counties surrounding it instead of putting it with, Cortland, which is a college-edge county, or Utica, or also Ithaca. So they really have a lot of options for drawing Katko out. And they can, if they're really willing to be aggressive, they can move Binghamton. If they're really willing to be aggressive, they could move the 4 ancestrally Democratic North Country counties, which are St. Lawrence, Franklin, and Clinton, and Essex. And in case you're wondering, yes, Clinton did vote narrowly for Hillary. They could move those 4 counties, particularly Essex and Clinton, into Delgado's district, along with Binghamton potentially. There's a lot they can do to try to shore up their incumbents.
Yeah, I think Stefanik has made preparations for, at least Stefanik, who currently represents the 21st, has made preparations for her district being shifted closer to Albany. I believe she moved to Saratoga Springs fairly recently. She moved much closer to the Albany area. Kind of seems to be anticipating that district's going to be dismantled a little bit at least.
Right.
One risk for Democrats in redistricting is if they do lose 1 or 2 districts, the 25th congressional district, which is Rochester, will gain in population and will have to necessarily absorb some of the Republican areas around it. This shouldn't be too big of a deal for now, but there have been occasions where that district has almost flipped Republican.
Right.
It almost flipped Republican in 2014. It was by maybe 1,000 votes or so, which was a surprise. Louise Slaughter was very popular in the district and seemed to have very little difficulty winning. So that's maybe one sliver of hope for Republicans. If they could get a Catco quality candidate in that district, they could maybe be competitive in a red wave. But if Democrats get that state Senate supermajority, they have a control of the complete redistricting process. They bypass the commission. They do whatever they want. Right. You could even see the 11th district become more Democratic, I would think.
Oh yeah, if the Democrats wanted to, they could do what the map, I believe, back in the 70s did, and they could have the district go over the Staten Island Ferry and take in Lower Manhattan, and it would be a hideous map, but it would put Max Rose into a district that Hillary won by about 25 points. So,
would Nadler accept that? That's the question.
Well, Nadler could do that if he was willing to accept more of South Brooklyn, which it's easier said than done, but I don't see it happening. But there's all sorts of ways the Democrats can screw around with the maps to create the outcomes that they want on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is one or two the more likely scenario? Because I've seen one being the most likely, but I believe there was a substantial undercount of the census figures for Democrats in 2010, is what I've heard. That the voters were not, or that they didn't count enough people.
I haven't heard about this voter undercount. I'm happy to do more research into this, but personally, I haven't heard this. Long Island is very clearly an area where the Democrats could draw 3 seats if they have full control, and where the Republicans can draw 3 seats if they have full control. And with that, the Democrats will probably take advantage of that if they have a supermajority in the state Senate to try to draw out. We'll try to force Zeldin into a primary against the Republican who could win New York 2, or if Jackie Gordon wins New York 2, I believe Elections Daily currently has it at lean R on our ratings,
mm-hmm.
then have to move. But there's all sorts of things the Democrats can do with the maps in 2021, 2022, regardless of what happens this year.
Yeah. Definitely a state to look at. You wouldn't think that states like New York or California would be so interesting when it comes to congressional races, but there are in every state there are pockets of Republican and Democratic strength. Almost every state, like Massachusetts, would be kind of one where there's not a whole lot of pockets of Republican strength in terms of like actual being able to coalesce into a district. But this is a state to pay attention to in the future and in 2020. And we will be, as with other primaries, we'll be covering the New York primaries when they happen. We'll be covering June 9th. You can go to the Elections Daily website. I'll actually go ahead and show a screen share of the Elections Daily website, where we've recently made a modification to it, where we will be having live results on our website as well as on our Twitter account. So if you go to electionsdaily.com, you can see over in the corner over here, election results. If you do this drop down, you have Georgia, Nevada, North Dakota, North Carolina, or North Dakota, South Carolina, and West Virginia will be the races we're covering for June 9th. And then going forward, we'll be covering other races in a similar regard. But yeah, I think with that, we've probably covered about as much as we can. Thanks to all the guests who have tuned in to watch this episode. We're excited to be back to the Elections Weekly podcast. Thanks to Adam and the other guests for appearing on this show.
Happy to.
Yeah, definitely we'll be back. We're starting this week. We're moving the Elections Weekly podcast to Thursdays. So be sure to tune in this Thursday to see the next edition of Elections Weekly. And with that, I think